You are not wearing black, but you are in mourning. Your husband is dead. I said your husband is dead.
My husband.
I gave you no permission to marry Brandon. Nor would I ever.
Margaret brings up the promise Henry once made. He had sworn that if she ever married again, the choice would be hers. That reminder enrages Henry. How dare you look at me like that? I am your lord and master, not your brother. Blinded by anger, Henry confiscates her London residence and banishes both Margaret and Charles from court. After returning home, Margaret unleashes all her fury on Charles. She never imagined her impulsiveness would cost her this much. If it weren't for you, I would still be the Queen of Portugal. Desperate to return to court, Charles turns to a mutual friend and asks William to speak on his behalf, hoping to soften the king's attitude. But Henry is still furious. William barely opens his mouth before being cut off. Charles is your friend? I have not forgiven my Lord Suffolk. He never asked my permission to marry my sister. Shut down again. Charles has no choice but to seek out Thomas. After all, Thomas's daughter Anne has completely captured the king's attention. If anyone can speak to Henry now, it's her father. With Thomas's help, Charles finally secures an audience with the king. Charles did have one particular talent. Because he always knew how to play his cards right, he moved effortlessly through a sea of women. Even a young and beautiful noble lady fell for him at first sight, but the king refused to believe that Charles really had that kind of charm. Charles deliberately approached her during the horse race. "My Lady Buckingham, would you do me the honor of letting me wear your favors today?" Already admiring him, the noble girl naturally didn't refuse. She tied the silk scarf, a symbol of a young woman's affection, onto Charles's horse. With just one look, this seasoned womanizer knew he had already won the game. Watching from the sidelines, Henry gave a knowing smile. Sure enough, the girl gave herself away far too easily. But what no one expected was for her father to catch them in the act. He couldn't accept that his unmarried daughter had been dishonored. "You defiled my daughter." He pressed his sword against Charles's throat. "I swear to your grace someone else was there before me." Hearing such shameless words, the old father nearly killed him on the spot. But knowing Charles was the king's closest companion, he had no choice but to back down. Yet when he looked at his daughter, he was filled with both anger and heartbreak. She didn't say a word. She simply raised her hand and slapped him across the face. But the girl was the kind who never learned her lesson. Her father's warnings went in one ear and straight out the other, as if he hadn't heard anything at all. That encounter left yet another scar on his face. Maybe that's just how it works. The more you give, the easier it is to get hurt. Charles, on the other hand, walked away far more carefree. He had already pushed that relationship out of his mind, leaving the girl alone to grieve over it. But none of this slowed Charles down. True to his flirtatious nature, he showed no restraint at all, even while carrying out a diplomatic marriage mission. Not only did he seduce the princess, meant to secure an alliance with Portugal, he went even further and married her on his own authority. This completely enraged the king, who had been counting on that alliance. As Charles knelt on the ground, begging for forgiveness, Henry said nothing. Instead, he summoned Charles into a private room and chose to deal with the situation in the form of a game. "If you can beat me, you may return to court, but if you lose, you will never set foot in the palace again." The rules sounded simple, but carrying them out was anything but. Henry was unpredictable and fiercely proud. Letting him lose outright would humiliate him and risk unrest, but if Charles lost, his future at court would be over. So to satisfy both sides, Charles deliberately dragged the game out round after round, waiting patiently until the moment felt right before finally winning. Henry's reaction terrified him. Just as Charles was at a loss, unsure of what would happen next, Henry suddenly smiled and said, "Welcome back." Only then did Charles finally breathe a sigh of relief. The crime of secretly marrying the king's sister was quietly swept aside. Charles returned to court and once again gained the king's favor, but his nature never changed. Before long, his flirtatious side resurfaced. He began pursuing married women. A husband who has changed is never invisible to his wife. Margaret sensed it all and slowly fell into depression. Her health worsened by the day. In the end, she collapsed and never stood up again. With no other choice, Charles reported the news to the king. "Majesty, forgive me. Margaret is dead." Hearing the news, Henry was both furious and heartbroken, but what was done could not be undone, so he could only express his anger in this way. Poor Margaret thus ended her life quietly and hastily. Elsewhere, Anne Boleyn was sent to the executioner's block for failing to bear a son. She was Henry VIII's second wife. It took her 7 long years to climb her way to the throne, yet she remained queen for only 3 before falling out of favor with her husband. Back when Anne was still a lady-in-waiting, she had completely captivated the king. Every glance, every smile left Henry utterly obsessed. To win her heart, Henry wrote countless love letters. In those letters, he shed all the authority of a king, lowering himself completely just to please her. The letter roughly said this:
"I have given you my heart. Now I desire
to dedicate my body
No,
to you.
please.
Even her brother George couldn't help but marvel that a king famous for his affairs would humble himself so completely before his sister, the King of England writing to my little sister, promising to be her servant. It's unbelievable, but Anne stayed clear-headed. She understood better than anyone that with a man like Henry, the one thing he craved most was what he couldn't have. And sure enough, Henry fell right into it. My lord, your tokens and signs of affection frighten me. How can I be what you believe me to be? You know I am but a commoner, unworthy of your love. In her letters, Anne claimed she didn't deserve the king's affection, yet at the same time she sent him a portrait meant only for his eyes. This push and pull, this gentle refusal wrapped in temptation, only made Henry more obsessed. He immediately rode out to see her ready to offer the greatest sincerity a king could give. If it pleases you to be my true and loyal mistress, my friend, to give yourself to me body and soul, I promise I will take you as my only mistress. All Anne had to do was say yes, and the entire Boleyn family would rise with her into wealth and glory. But faced with such a tempting offer, Anne found she couldn't bring herself to feel happy at all.